Hey everybody, Big Toad here, and welcome back to my studio. In this video, I'm going to be working again on that 6 foot by 3 foot painting of an Idaho butte and foothills, and I'm going to be focusing on some foreground grasses, building out the ground layers alongside the road and up the hills. All right, so let's get started. All right, so the palette for these grasses that I'm using, we're going to have Naples yellow, which is going to be one of the primary colors, yellow ochre. I'm going to have a little bit of cad yellow light and cad yellow medium. And then to turn some of those a little more red, I'm going to bring in a little bit of burnt sienna into the mix and sometimes load it directly on my brush to just get a streak of burnt sienna in the grasses. I'm going to do this brush work for the grasses using an impasto method, where I load my brush. I've got several different colors already mixed up. Obviously, I've got my straight out of the tube colors, like I said, yellow ochre, Naples yellow, and sometimes every once in a while I'll dip in that cad yellow light, cad yellow mediums, but very sparingly while I'm doing the grasses. Now, also what I've done is I've taken those colors and mixed out other hues by, for instance, taking the Naples yellow and mixing it in with yellow ochre to get an in-between color there. I also take the cad yellow lights and cad yellow mediums and mix them in with the yellow ochre to get several hues. And then sometimes I'll even mix those together. I'm looking for variations. And in a sense, it gives me variations in my grass strokes. So the brush I'm using is a size 10 natural bristle filbert, and I think it worked really well for the grasses on this very large painting. I like the natural bristles for this type of texture for these grasses, whereas a synthetic bristle would make the strokes a little tighter and it just wouldn't look as natural. So I think every oil painter should have both kinds in their toolbox. The natural bristles, typically hog bristles, and a set of synthetics as well. So as I said, I was using an impasto method, which means I'm painting right over the top. I'm putting down rather a little thicker paint because I want the texture from that natural bristle to show through. And I'm also using a broken color approach where I'm using all the different grass yellows and greens that I created and putting them on. I don't want to use the term randomly, but that's what it might look like, is it's random. I'm doing it with forethought to create interesting patterns and flow rather than just an even pattern. You don't want an even pattern. But so broken color to give the grasses kind of movement and texture, the hillside to give it shape and slope, and also using, like I said, the impasto approach of painting color right over another. I typically, as I've said before, I very seldom wait for my paint to dry. I just paint what I want to paint. And one of the tricks of doing that is making sure that the paint is not too thick, and so a little bit of linseed oil can thin it out if it won't go over the other paint. You don't want to push the paint around with loaded. You don't want to push the paint that's on the painting already around with thick paint on your brush. So you want to have the consistency of that paint a little bit loose, buttery, so it goes on easily. I admit that I struggle to stay out of the way of my painting. This is such a large painting, and having the space to move the camera back far enough so I can capture the painting, and without getting myself in the way, I'm just struggling to maintain that. So forgive me if you're seeing my shoulder a lot, and I'm trying to edit those parts out, but it's just difficult on this larger painting. Right now I'm holding the brush overhand. Sometimes I'm going to hold it as a pencil because I'm using a method where I put the brush down and flick it upwards to create tufts of grass. And when I hold it like a pencil, it's easier to get that upwards swipe rather than the underhand approach. The overhand approach, it's a little more difficult to get that. So depending on where I'm at in the painting, you'll see me switch how I hold the brush. So I also want to talk about the filbert and why I'm using the filbert here. And it's a large filbert, size 10 filbert. And the filbert does really well for this type of grass and painting in this way because of its shape. And I'll explain. If you watch me throughout the process, I will put the brush down using several different methods. I will use the very edge of the brush and flick it up to get a narrow tuft of grass. I will use, it's harder to tell, but sometimes I'll lay it on there and only use maybe a third of the brush. Because it's rounded, I can use a different angle of the brush and just get a third of the brush to touch the canvas, and I flick it upward. And I can also use a big chunk of it by using, putting it straight on there and flicking it up. And by pressing harder, I can take the stroke out larger and create a larger tuft of grass. And so that large filbert gives me that ability to create multiple different tufts of grass with the single brush. Now, because the grass is further away on the section I'm working on now, I'm using a smaller filbert, about a size 4. And I'm working on this darker line of that runs up the hill. I wanted to create the illusion of that there's a dip in the hill, and there's a space behind the little hill, so the hill's not flat as it comes down, but there's a little rivet or a little valley in it. And I'm saying valley, I'm using that word loosely because it's small, maybe only drops about 5 feet. And by putting that darker sliver in there, I'm creating the illusion that there's a shadow behind the grass on the bottom of that, and creating depth there. And you notice I overpainted that dark spot. I made it a little thicker, a little heavier, but then I could go over with some brush strokes, some scumbling, and some grass strokes to break that up, and it leaves an underlayer of that shadowy effect. And I have switched now. You'll see me switch again to the big filbert here. Again, using the very tip of it, the edge of it as well. And it's all how you load the paint on the brush and what section of the brush you touch to the painting of the tuft of grass you're going to get. And so you'll see me, I'm doing random swipes and directions, trying to get those strokes to go all different directions as I've described in the past, to create the illusion of movement and variety within the hillside. And of course, to add more variety and movement to the hillside, I'm switching which mixture of paint I'm using, from some of the darker ones to the lighter ones to the more yellow ochreish ones to the more reddish ones. And I'm using that variety to create, again, more vitality and movement to the painting as well. I also want to take time to talk about how I'm doing some more shadows and creating different angles of the sunlight and reflections. Let's start down by the road. And you'll notice closer to the road, the grasses I've added a little more of the burnt sienna into it, giving it a color that's similar to the road. And that is sort of like a reflection of the light coming off the road, shining up into the grass, making it just a little bit more red. It also, I think it's aesthetically pleasing in multiple ways because that is more reddish, like the road. It also serves to maybe give the illusion that it's just a little bit shadowed, because that's a steeper part of the hill as it drops down a little more drastically once it gets to the fence line down to the road itself. So I've added some darker colors in there. I've also added darker colors along there and broken it up with some lighter colors as well to give the illusion of different layers of light and texture. And there I'm showing you the big filbert that I used. So also next to the fence posts, coming down from the upper right-hand corner, headed towards the left-hand corner, you'll see I put reflections of the fence posts into the grasses. And what I needed to do here, because it's in the grasses, I needed to have that shadow broken up so that it wasn't always the same exact shape, and because it's a shadow being cast onto the grass that's there. If you look at the color I've used, there's a little bit of blue in it. I'm using ultramarine blue and burnt sienna as a base for that. I've mixed in some cobalt blue to lighten it up a little bit and give it a slightly different, less reddish, because I want it to be cooler in there. So I went with some cobalt blue, quite a bit of it, as opposed to all ultramarine blue. And I've also introduced a little bit of Naples yellow to soften that up a little bit. So by messing around with these colors, I'm able to create that shadowy effect, which I use to create the shadow from the fence posts. I also use that same type of approach to create shadows on the left side of rocks and the sagebrush and the trees. And you'll see that color throughout. It's also the same color I use to create the shadow of that little gully that comes down the side of the hill I was just talking about before. It gets that little gully there, creating a little darker patch where the sun's not hitting it because it's lower below the sun. So the shadows I use. And working around these rocks I have, and the tree trunks and the fence posts, get a little slower, a little more careful with that. And also want to talk about the contrasts. Contrast is one of the very, very important things when painting. Without contrast, your objects, it just all bleeds together. And so you have to think about contrast, especially when you're doing something like this grassy field where it'd be, you could make it all the same color and not really be able to see any detail. And what I'm creating here is the illusion of detail by contrasting these colors a little bit, using the various yellows and putting in a little bit of the burnt siennas to give me contrast of not only color, not only of value, but also of warmth. Because the Naples yellow is also a lower chroma than, say, what I'm getting out of some of the more direct burnt siennas. And so the chromas also gives me contrast. And while they all fall, I think, well within nearness to each other, there's just enough contrast in color, in value, in chroma to create the effect, the illusion of natural grasses growing up on this beautiful Idaho mountain hillside. And contrast is what I use when I created the illusion of that gully there. By putting little darker colors in there, it contrasts and causes a shadow, which then creates a break for the eye to notice that there's a dip in the hillside. And so contrast is all over your paintings. Contrast in the shadows, contrast in the values where the sun's hitting it, where it's not, contrast in the different colors of the grasses. And it's an important concept to understand and how to utilize. In using broken color, which is what I'm doing here in the grasses, that's the key to broken color, is contrast, to create movement, to create the illusion of multiple colors of grasses, and somehow they look different, yet they blend well together, and creating the illusion of, again, a grassy hillside with movement, where I'm not painting every individual sliver of grass. I'm creating this illusion of thousands of just a grassy field. And that's the illusion that I wanted here. So again, this is a very large painting. It's 6 foot wide by 3 foot tall, covering a very massive landscape. It's going to be a prominent fixture on the wall in a home above in their dining area, above their large custom built table. And so it's going to take up a big spot. And when you're doing a painting this big, you're using a lot. I mean, obviously a lot of the same skills and techniques, but you gotta think about the size of things. I have to paint this grass maybe a little differently than I would if it was a 16-inch by 10-inch or by 12-inch painting. I would be using smaller brushes. I would probably use different strokes while I would create the illusion of grasses. I wouldn't be maybe as much. And so this painting's been a lot of fun, and I haven't found it really to be any more challenging than most any other paintings I've done on a smaller scale. To be honest, I thought, I've never done one this big in oils before. I've done large murals with acrylics, but that was years ago, and I got away with not being as perfect as maybe I wanted to be. But I thought this would be more intimidating. But once I got started and once I laid it out carefully and did enough planning, it's really come together well. And so I like the way the grass looks. The client for which I'm painting this for, they enjoy the look of the grass, and it's really starting to come together. Getting past some of the ugly stages now. I've got got a good start on the backgrounds, got a good handle on the midgrounds, and now this foreground is starting to get pulled together. And what I'm doing here, I'm not trying to repaint anything, but as I step back and look at the painting, I notice areas that maybe the brush strokes aren't as prominent, or there's too much color bleeding together. And so I'll come back in with a different color, different brush strokes to try to enhance the painting in these areas. So that's why I'm coming back in and painting over this using that impasto method of just taking, loading up the brush and painting right over paint that I've just laid down. I'm not concerned about how thick it is, although if it gets too thick, I do pick that up and move that around a little bit. I don't want giant clumps on there, if or any, but this gives me a really nice brush strokes and texture to the painting. And I love great texture on my paintings, my oil paintings. I'm an oil painter, and in my mind, and I know not everybody's like this, I want the texture of the brush and the oil paint to show up. And that's another great advantage to doing a painting this large. I still get that. In other words, I don't like blended color. I don't like to overly blend colors so you can't see transitions. I'm not afraid to show transitions between the colors on the mountain or in the sky. I'll use that in places, and other places I will. I want to see a stronger break. Here I'm going back in with a little darker color to just reinvigorate that line, that break for the gully, to make that gully a little more prominent. But again, I will come back in like before. I wanted to bring some darker strokes up into the lighter grasses, is why I'm doing this, to bring the darker strokes up in, softens those edges a little bit. And then when I lay the lighter paints in front of it, it'll settle back into the landscape a little bit. But you see, I softened that edge a little by doing that edge where it moves up into it. I even used this big number 10 filbert to paint in around, cut into that sagebrush that I just was around. And I use that to cut in with just, again, varying the style in which I hold the brush and how I apply which part of the brush to break that up a little bit. So here I'm going in and cutting back into the shadowed area with some lighter, I think pure Naples yellow at that point. I don't want the shadow to line up directly with the top of the fence post, so I'm having to bring in some lighter color on top of that there. You don't want the fence post to line up perfectly with the edge of the gully, in the darkness of the gully. So I needed to break that a little bit as well. I think I spend ultimately, oh man, probably between 6 and 8 hours just doing the grasses in the foreground on this painting. It's a large painting, takes a while, and so it was a lot of work, but it's very relaxing for me to do this kind of work. It allows me to settle in to the rhythm of it, and just I focus on just the painting and just the strokes, and it just soothes my mind because nothing else is in there but me and the painting and the paintbrush and the paints. And and every once in a while my son or my wife will come out and talk to me while I'm painting, and that's good too. Kind of breaks up the monotony of that a little bit, gives me a break. But yeah, and I didn't spend a solid 8 hours in one day. It was broken up over like 3 days of painting to get this grasses in. Probably yeah, about 6, maybe as many as 8 by the time it's all said and done. So I edited down all that video to something a little more reasonable, and hopefully showing you enough of the painting process to let you see my techniques and methods and how I do the brush work. Just flipping that brush here and there, rolling it over, striking up with different parts and pieces of the brush to get the effect I'm after. Again, using the impasto method, so I keep bringing in more paint and more color to build out the texture and the breaking of that color the way I want it. And I'll come in and lay down a big area, say like here, of the Naples yellow, and I want to, and then come back and touch it up with some other colors, the yellow ochres and the various mixes I've created to again create variety within my grass. For my final thought on this session of painting, I want to point out the transition between the foreground and the midground, in how the foreground, the colors are brighter, more vibrant. The chroma is higher, as we say, than the midground. And two things are going to happen as in landscaping as objects get further away. They are going to lose their chroma on the top end, so they're not going to be as brilliant. Although they could be light, but the chroma, the brilliance, is going to drop, and the darks aren't going to be as dark. And you can see that here in this transition area where I have brilliant colors and I have dark colors that still have vibrancy to them in this midground, in this foreground, which I do not have in the midground. They've lost some of their chroma and their intensity, and that's atmospheric perspective. That's how it's supposed to look when they go away. So using the same paints to get a different effect by dropping the chroma for my midground. And I worked backwards. I worked from the background into the midground to the foreground, knowing where I wanted to end up. In other words, I knew I wanted my highest, purest colors towards the front or towards the foreground. So I saved those for this point in my painting. This has been a lot of work, and a lot of work is still yet to come. So I hope you'll join me in the future as I finish out this painting. I've got, I'm sure, several more sessions to go. Well, I think that's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And I really appreciate you sticking around to the end. For now, this is the Big Toad, and I am out.